Welcome, bienvenue, bonjour. My name is Renee Ketchum and I curate the cultural offerings for AFUSA. And I am so excited today to welcome Roger Mummert for our conference on Beaux Arts America, how the École des Beaux Arts influenced the architectural landscape of America. The Alliance Française, AFUSA, is the largest Alliance Française network in the world, helping 26,000 learners of French each year to learn French, live French, and love French. And please see our little video on the Alliance Française network. We have some really exciting national events coming up soon. Next Monday, we will have Peter de Bruges back for our French Cinematheque on the story of Céline Dion called Aline. And we're very excited to welcome Beth Gershnesik back on July 17th to talk about Sargent and Paris and the Gilded Age based on the exhibit that's currently at the Met. And then we have some amazing films that will challenge you with horror and romance coming up for the summer on French Cinematheque. So please go to afusa.org and register for our upcoming events. A few logistics. Please stay on mute during the presentation and stay on speaker view. All questions should be put in the chat and we'll address them at the end of the program. And if you have any technical issues, sign back in after a couple of moments using the original Zoom link. This event is being recorded for our YouTube channel and the total runtime is 1 hour. Roger Mummert has been with us many, many times, and we are so excited to have him come back. He is the creator of the ParisProject.net, which explores the history of Paris as a city of ideas. Roger's AFUSA national presentations include, and I hope you've all seen them, Paris Goods, Luxury Retailing and the Emergence of Les Grands Magasins of Paris, Paris, a City of Ideas, Myths and Mysteries of the Bastille, which I hope you'll look at again before Bastille Day, which is coming up, as well as D-Day and the Soul of France. All of them are available on YouTube. Roger's writing on culture, literature, and travel can be found in the archives of the New York Times and elsewhere. So welcome back, Roger. We're also excited to hear this wonderful presentation.
Oh, thank you so much, Renee. It's wonderful to be back working with the Alliance Française, which was a fundamental part of me getting a beginning in French, along with my high school French teacher, I want to thank. But going to the Alliance Française when I was in Paris in the 70s as a student was just essential to me appreciating Paris and French culture. So I thank you, and I really welcome the opportunity to give back to Alliance Française. I always begin with a little bit of a caveat. As Renee mentioned, I am a journalist, and even though today's program is about history, I'm not a historian, I'm not an anthropologist, I'm not a linguist, but a journalist incorporates a lot of those kinds of skills and methods of inquiry in collecting facts and insights and interpretations, and in the end, we just try to tell a story. So think of me as a journalist trying to tell a story. And what a story we have today, a very enjoyable one. Beaux Arts, the research for this took me to Paris to walk around the streets of Paris in the middle of the winter. Great time as far as low crowds and great time to see buildings. The weather was terrible, but it was Paris nonetheless. And also had the opportunity to walk around the streets of New York and Boston in particular and revisit some of the Beaux Arts gems that are part of our American architectural landscape. And there we begin with Beaux Arts America at the really the font, and I think the best example of Beaux Arts America in this country, the New York Public Library, the Schwarzman Building at 42nd Street and 5th Avenue. Just an amazing place, both inside and out, and inspiring in every way. In front of the library, let's take a look here at a picture of two lions who sit on 5th Avenue, as they have for more than a century, guarding the New York Public Library. Now, folks are surprised to learn that the lions have names. They're named for two attributes common to the New Yorker: patience and fortitude. And though they were carved in the Bronx and reside in Manhattan, if they could speak, they might have a bit of a French accent. Their sculptors studied in Paris, as did the two architects of the magnificent library itself, who studied at L'École des Beaux Arts. Well, the story of Beaux Arts America takes us back and forth across the waters between Paris and the towns and cities of America. We'll examine why so much of our American architectural landscape, our schools, post offices, government bureaus, courts, banks, museums, and homes of note, are rendered in a style that came to prominence in Paris in the 19th century, and one that America embraced as an expression of power, stability, and culture. Take a look around. We all still live in Beaux Arts America. Next slide, please. These are two of my favorite places. Both of them libraries, the École des Beaux Arts Bibliothèque in Paris and the New York Public Library main reading room, the room 315, where I've spent many a happy hour just delving into history, just learning. And I must say, just reading a book in an environment like this is a different experience. It just is part of the majesty of learning. And rooms that were built more or less as cathedrals of learning themselves. Now, once again, it's my pleasure to work with the Alliance Française in examining commonalities between French and American history and culture. Now, 5 years ago, I began the ParisProject.net to explore Paris as a city of ideas. And in that time, I've been amazed that so many ideas that began in Paris or flourished there also find home in America as well. Ideas about democracy, the tripartite system of government described by Montesquieu. It's in today's paper when we talk about the balance of power between the three parts of our government. Ideas about reason and science that were defined in the Encyclopedia of Diderot and d'Alembert. Ideas about the social contract of Rousseau, his ideas on equality and social justice. They're universal and timely. And ideas about the love of liberty that inspired the Marquis de Lafayette to devote his life and fortune to birthing a new nation. All of these were ideas that drew Americans to Paris, and they brought those ideas home to America. Next slide, please. The École des Beaux Arts on Rue Bonaparte in the 6th arrondissement on the left bank. And we're going to take a look at one of the grand ideas of the 19th century, the Beaux-Arts style. The formulation of the Beaux-Arts, or fine arts, began in Paris in the 17th century as a royal académie founded by Louis XIV. After the Revolution, it developed into an école, one with a unique approach to learning. The school drew an international body of students, especially students from America, seeking a formal French training in the arts and architecture. Well, those who came to study architecture encountered the distinct thinking of the Beaux-Arts era, and they learned new techniques of building with modern materials of the Second Industrial Revolution. When these American graduates returned home, they were called Paris men because they were able to work at great speed and with great skills. And they were in tremendous demand as they shaped the America of the Gilded Age and beyond. The next slide. We have a look at Beaux Arts America. We see it everywhere as we travel about. At the top left, that's Union Station in Washington, where I went last year to the French consulate to give a talk on D-Day and the American and French experience. The U.S. Customs Building in Lower Manhattan, also in Lower Manhattan, is a bank that reflects the Beaux-Arts influence in this country. At the bottom left, we see the Boston Public Library with its magnificent reading room, which is very much attributed to the Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève by Le Proust in Paris, if you know that, very similar. And of course, the Gilded Age mansions of the Hudson Valley and Newport. And at the bottom right, the J.P. Morgan Home and Library in New York City, all reflections of the Beaux-Arts influence in this country. The next slide shows us, let's see, Beaux-Arts around the world. In the 19th century and beyond, this style of architecture that began in Paris also found its place in the far reaches of the globe, to Australia and the Far East and so forth. But here are two examples I happened upon in recent years: the Palacio de Bellas Artes in Mexico City, a real tribute to the Palais Garnier or the Opéra Garnier in Paris. There it is on the Alameda of Mexico City. And I was in San Jose, Costa Rica for a meeting and happened upon the post office there, which is clearly a French Renaissance, Beaux Arts kind of a building. Remarkable that the far-reaching effect of Beaux Arts. The next slide shows us something of the timeline of École des Beaux Arts. If I could just jog through this in broad strokes, this shows how the practice of architecture, the profession of it, began, as you see on the left, under the aegis of the guild system. And later we learn how it came under the control of the monarchy and the centralization efforts of Louis XIV, the creation of an Académie des Beaux-Arts and an Académie d'Architecture also. And that ended with, or there was a severing with the Revolution, and the practice reconstituted under an École des Beaux-Arts after in the Restoration period, and then it severed from that école entirely in the 1968 demonstrations and so forth. But for about 120 years, architecture was taught at the École des Beaux-Arts. And among the many students, about 500 of them were American architects who came there to train. If we can look on the left side, there's an interesting illustration. As I said, the architect is doing the easy work. The other guys are doing the heavy lifting there. And there's an illustration. Help me with this, guys, if you would. It says, Chemin, canaux, pont et chaussée, roads, channels, bridges, and pavements, d'un état bien dirigé, font la prospérité. Those projects in a state of good management makes prosperity. Okay. There are a couple of critical dates here, if we could. Just the first one, the 1648, represents the creation of the Academy, as I mentioned. 1671, the Academy of Architecture. 1793, the severing of, I don't actually have that on there. Oh, yes, I do. The abolishment by the National Convention, and then the 1816, the creation of the Beaux-Arts. The buildings were built just after that. And as I mentioned, the influx of American students in the late 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, and then the severance of the school itself. Today, the profession of architecture is taught under the banner of the University of Paris at some 20 locations. I'm sorry, at locations around Paris, but also about 20 locations around the country. One little note there, 1863, correction, I'm going to call out the École nationale supérieure des beaux-arts. That's the name of it now, was established by Napoleon III. That was kind of obscured by the seal at the lower right. Okay. Let's go to the next slide if we could. The École des Beaux-Arts, the method of teaching at the École, I should say, had four founders. Jean-Léduc and Henri de Brousse, Félix Dubin, and Léon Vaudoyer. And you see some of their most famous buildings that they designed themselves, where they left quite an imprint on Paris. But these were all students at the École in the early days. All of them were top students. They won the biggest prize, the Grand Prix de Rome, and they were awarded several additional years of study in Rome, where they studied classical buildings, which is very much reflected in what they've designed here. And they returned, all four, to the École des Beaux-Arts to form the faculty and to formulate really the way that architecture was taught in Paris for most of the 19th century, and it influenced the teaching of architecture all around the world. I recently went to Columbia University Architecture School, had a graduation. My nephew is an architect, and he took an additional postgraduate course. And after the wonderful graduation that had so many international students, I spoke to one dean there who said she grew up in China, was trained in architecture there. I said, how do they teach it? She said, oh, it's very formal in China. We use the system of the École des Beaux-Arts. This is in the year 2025. She's talking about a system that by and large was designed by these four architects in the first half of the 19th century. Now, in the The strict École system promoted, according to some of the detractors, kind of an ossified notion of architecture that served nation and privilege, not the needs of the people who lived in the cities. So there is some disagreement about the high-mindedness of their method of teaching, which we'll get into, but they very much had an interesting, progressive, and utopian view of how architecture should be taught. That is to say, that they were teaching people to be critical thinkers who became architects, and not just teaching people to copy buildings and be architects like those who came before. Let's look at the next slide, if we may. Defining the Beaux-Arts style. Now, this is something that's a little bit complicated because there are many styles within what's called Beaux-Arts. But the beginnings of Beaux-Arts were about the 1830s, and they continued, buildings continued to be built in that style through the end of the century, the Belle Epoque, and right up to about World War I, when with wars, building tends to stop for some years. And on the far side of it, Beaux-Arts had fallen out of favor in France. Not so in America, where it really came into favor in the latter part of the 19th century, and our buildings were built well into the 40s or beyond in Beaux-Arts style. But in terms of style, there are three main attributes of Beaux-Arts: classicism, symmetry, and ornamentation. Classicism. Beaux-Arts incorporates elements of Greek and Roman classicism combined with Romanesque, French Renaissance, Neoclassicism, and Baroque and Rococo styles. An example, the Palais Gallieri in the 16th arrondissement, wonderful museum of fashion. It's used as a museum of fashion, now originally a home. Symmetry. In recognizing Beaux-Arts, always look for symmetry. And there we see it in Le Grand Palais, which was created 1897-1900 for the 1900 Exposition by Léon Guimet and a number of other Beaux-Arts trained architects. And then ornamentation. This form of extreme, you might say opulent ornamentation, kind of screams Beaux-Arts. The embellishment of the facades of homes with first carved stone and then cast stone is a hallmark of the Beaux-Arts style. Let's look at the next slide and materials of Beaux-Arts. The Beaux-Arts style came to prominence during the first and then the second Industrial Revolution, where a number of new materials presented opportunities to build differently. The first was iron and steel framing. The use of materials, in particular cast iron and steel. This allowed for increased building size and more creative shapes. We're going to draw from the three Grand Magasins, these pictures here, the Grand Magasin, the department stores we spoke about last time, to show iron and steel framing in La Samaritain. So decorative, so elegant, so beautiful that this is the design of the inside of the building. There was a thought, why would you cover up something that is functional and can be beautiful at the same time? An incredible thing to see at La Samaritain. Even if you don't buy anything, as I didn't, the building is a treat. Next, the opulent use of glass made possible through the industrial manufacture of plate glass. And here we have the Galerie Lafayette's famous atrium. It soars, 65 or more feet, and it just gives a magnificent experience of being in this department store and feeling that you're, in a sense, on a grand stage of some sort with the sunlight pouring through and the beautiful glass above. Again, it's the use of plate glass that made it possible to make buildings lighter and more fanciful, as you see in this case. Also, there was stone carving, as you see at the right. Now, this was said to be the era when stone sang, and elaborate stone carvings on building facades reached an apex. Often you see the names of sculptors along with the names of architects on the facades of some of these ornate buildings. Finally, there was polychromy, as you see with these colored ceramic tiles on the face of a Printemps department store. This was very popular, but for a short while in the Beaux-Arts era. And it's really fun to find some examples of polychromy and to see how brilliant they remain in kind of dressing up kind of a stone limestone facade in what is often a gray Paris city. Let's go to the next slide, please, and talk about the nomenclature of Beaux-Arts. In order to talk about the Beaux Arts architecture. You need to know something of architectural terms. It's not too difficult, and I hope I get all this right. I've got some architect friends who are listening in, I know. We see examples of rustication, which is the decorative treatment of stone facades, also often cut into these kind of panels and so forth. We see the use of cornices, which are ledges or roof lines. They can be roof lines, or they're used in an ornamental sense to stretch across the middle and upper parts of buildings and so forth. They're ornamental and they're supported by corbels or brackets, sometimes called consoles, and very decorative ones that become part of the statement themselves. We see the use of pediments, triangular or arched over doors and windows, as you see with the opera comique. And also on the right side, I want to call attention to what is the family tomb of Baron Haussmann. He was the head of the renovation of Paris, 1862 to 1870, and his family tomb is right on the main avenue leading into the Père Lachaise Cemetery. He got some good placement there. And as far as the design of his tomb, he went for the full program. He's got the arched doorway decorated on both sides. He's got the pilasters on the corners there with the plinth at the bottom and the crown at the top. He's got the pediment, the triangular pediment with the cartouche in the middle and so forth, the dental detailing, the dentille. He's got it all there, the full program. That's something to be seen. And he's just down the stretch from Rossini and Colette. So Père Lachaise Cemetery, not to be missed. Now, the bottom part shows influences and the nomenclature of the latter part of the century. Baron Haussmann, whom I just put to rest, so to speak, dictated that the facades of all the buildings on his new boulevards be essentially flat, be uniform. They had running balconies along them, and they suffered from what was known as the sameness effect, just that were monotonous. And at the latter part, and this was actually written into law that the new buildings had to adhere to his rules about this. But the latter part of the century saw those rules loosened up and the emergence of all sorts of features on the facades of the buildings that gave dimension to these buildings. The emergence of arched bay windows you see in the left in private home around the Parc Monceau area. The use of decorative balustrades, as you see there with the three sets of balusters and again the decorative corbels holding them up. The use of the loggia, a recessed kind of a balcony. It was really Italian in origin. And then we see a very ornamental development in the very end of the century where developers put on every sort of feature that distinguished their inventory from a whole lot of other apartments that were for sale at the time of the building boom of the latter part of the century. We see columns, we see rustication, we see balustrades, we see domes, which became very popular. Very decorative domes were a part of the latter part of Beaux-Arts in Paris. Let's talk about the architects, leading architects of Beaux-Arts. There were many. Here are four in particular. Victor Laloux, who gave us the Gare d'Orsay, now the Musée d'Orsay, which was apparently a wonderful train station and even better museum, just filled with light and open spaces and grace and elegance. And if you're inside, ways to look out upon the Seine and over to the Louvre, it's just an absolute delight. Get tickets well in advance, be prepared to stand in a line, but it's a treat, the Musée d'Orsay now. Félix Dubin, whom I mentioned earlier, was one of the founders of École des Beaux-Arts and the creator of what was a campus of buildings which were perhaps not Beaux-Arts in style, but really which were Italianate, most of them. He had copied a number of buildings from Florence in particular because he wanted the students to live and work and learn inside these buildings to get a sense of how they operated, how they were put together, and the feelings that you got from being inside these classical buildings. The lower left is Jacques-Ignace Hittorf, was known as Haussmann's architect. He put up many of the buildings in the 1860s and 1870s that were part of the renovation of Paris. Here's the Gare du Nord, one of his most famous. And then there's Charles Garnier, who designed the Opéra Garnier, It began construction 1861, went to 1875, interrupted by the ending of the Second Empire and the Franco-Prussian War. But when it opened in 1875, it became one of the most glorious buildings for which Paris is known, and perhaps the best example, what was known as the Second Empire style. Even though the Second Empire had been ended at that point. Let's go to the next slide and see a little bit more of the Opéra Garnier. There we have the outside is just an incredible place. It steps, a wonderful gathering place for people to sit, and also musicians and performers to perform in that square. And inside is just a jaw-dropping experience of, as I said, the Second Empire style of opulence. Kind of looks like a place where Liberace would call home. What did he say? Yeah, too much of a good thing. Too much of a good thing is not enough. So that's the example of the Opéra Garnier, which was really one of the central meeting places in the La Belle Époque. And at the right, two examples of Beaux Arts Paris, the Grand Palais and the Pont Alexandre III, right next to it, created for the 1900 exhibition, and remaining to this day one of the really calling cards of Paris. Let's go to the next slide. I should say there was a saying at the time that during this era, Paris was effervescent, and that's certainly expressed by these buildings in particular. Now we go to the École method. How was architecture taught? Well, the École method provided a rigid foundation in classicism, but also encouraged freedom and competition. And I'm sorry, creating and creativity, but competition was the way that one advanced through this process, through the school. It was taught to learn, assimilate, forget, and then create. Now, the rigid foundation of the École method took place in the classroom. The critical thinking, creativity, and the problem solving, or analytique, took place in the atelier, the studio. Now, the atelier was the core. Here, students were guided by a patron, an advisor who was a notable working architect, but they honed their skills and developed a camaraderie largely on their own and as a group. One advanced through the école through competitions or concours. There was a concours d'admission, in which aspiring students took a rigorous test to become part of the second class of EDBA. They then competed repeatedly over the years to become part of the premier class. There were monthly concours. These competitions were judged by faculty judges. 2 were required per student every year, and they consisted of a quick sketch called an esquisse, followed by a projet rendu, or a rendered project that showed the traditional plan, section, and elevation. Now, there was no time limit on completing your studies at École des Beaux-Arts, but all students worked to achieve the architect DPLG, or Diplôme par le Gouvernement. And the creme de la creme competed for the highest award of all, the Grand Prix de Rome. This was judged by members of the Académie des Beaux-Arts that operated the school, and winners were granted 2 to 4 additional years in Rome to study classical buildings. Now, as we see through some of these pictures, which I find very fun, mentoring was part of this process. Competition was constant, but there was a cooperative spirit, as you see at the top right, students rushing their drawings to the école in their group charrette. In this system, the older students, known as anciens, were mentors to younger students, the nouveaux, and those students could be as young as 15, though most were in their 20s. Now, the American students who went there generally had some working experience before they went, so they were well into their 20s. And it said they did particularly well at the École des Beaux-Arts because they had more life experience. The atelier was also run by students. Students rented the space. Students hired the baton, and his role was to set the direction, but he was there just a few hours per week. The atelier was where the work took place and the mentoring process happened, and the ateliers competed with one another, much like fraternities in a modern university. And like fraternities, if we see pictures of them, there's always a few people goofing around, like the guy laying across the 2 tables there. You can see what kind of a camaraderie must have developed in this atelier system. So now we come to the big the Grande Querelle. What is French architecture? The next slide, please. For several decades running, there was a classic French querelle, an argument, a formal argument that was raging at the École des Beaux Arts. It had to do with conflicting views over a couple of questions. First, what is true French architecture? And second, how should students be taught to be architects? Should they be taught to be, should they not be taught to be critical thinkers who become architects, trained professionals who can solve problems and improve lives through their craft? Instead of memorizing a formula, analyze problems and come up with solutions. Well, there were several camps who were at battle here in this querelle. First, there was the orthodoxy, the Académie des Beaux Arts, which ran the École and also the Rome campus as well. These were older, established architects, and most of them tended to be neoclassicists. Then there were the reformers, sometimes called the Neo-Grecs for their admiration of the Greeks, or also known as rational classicists. And this was embodied by Henri Labrouste, one of the founders of the École des Beaux Arts. He was responsible for, as you see, the wonderful room at the Bibliothèque Nationale Richelieu, which you really should take a look at. You can't get in there without considerable documentation and application, but there is a place where you can walk in and stand and take pictures of the Salle Labrouste. It's just magnificent. The other camp, in his camp was also Félix Dubin. He was one of he was the designer of the Palais des Études, the central building in the campus. And these two called for greater openness in the regulations and the naming of the prize. They wanted the faculty to have more influence, and they wanted the academy, those old farts, to kind of bud out. Also within the camp of the reformers was a group known as the eclectics. They believed that broad historical references should be brought into new designs, that buildings should include neoclassicism, should include Baroque elements and Rococo elements. So these are all part of French history and architecture, and they should be part of modern French architecture. Now, turning to the centers, we have at the top left, Eugène Viollet-le-Duc. Now, Leduc was known as the father of modern architecture. But ironically, he's best known for his work in restoring medieval churches, the Gothic gem, of course, Notre Dame's restoration in the 1840s. But he wrote extensively. He was a real intellectual of architecture. He wrote extensively, theoretically, about form and function, the very foundations of what became modern architecture. He wrote discourses in architecture. He wrote a dictionnaire, Raisonner l'architecture française. And he believed that Gothic architecture was the most French architecture, that it had a rationality to it, that it served a purpose, was built around a function, and that it was very much ahead in many ways than the Beaux Arts architecture of the other teachers at the school. Now, this all came to a head, and there was a resolution in 1863, and a series of reforms came to be. Get this, the government seized control of the school and basically told the school how it was supposed to teach. No more of these liberal ideas. Imagine. And there were a number of reforms. The upshot was that Viollet-le-Duc, who had never gone to school, he refused to be part of a cookie cutter process, and he taught there a very short while. He departed. Labrouste remained. There was a new école director. There were a number of reforms that happened. And importantly, the school was removed from the control of the Académie of Architects, and it was created as the École nationale supérieure des Beaux-Arts, a name that remains to this day. So after this resolution, there were protests. Of course, the professors were unhappy. They protested. The academy sued. They were unhappy. Hundreds of students protested. It was a true French resolution to a true French querelle. And so we come now to a point of discussion. The École method, good or bad for architecture? Renee, I understand you have a couple of questions for us.
Yeah, and so Roger, to this question, I was wondering, why go to Paris? Were there at the same time, were there architecture schools in America? And then those students that did go to school in Paris, how did the American graduates once home impart sort of their skills and their work ethic in their home country?
Oh, that's a wonderful question, or a set of questions, and that forms the whole second part of what we're going to get to. But no, there were no architecture schools in the United States until the 18, let's see, until 1867. So there were no options. Architecture was seen as an adjunct to engineering. So there were engineering schools where one could study sort of the construction of buildings, but there was no way to become a certified architect in this country until, let's see, MIT first started a curriculum in 1865 and 1867. University of Illinois began a school of architecture. So if you wanted to learn architecture, generally, like the guild system in Europe, you studied with someone who already was an architect or called himself such. But beginning in the 1840s, the first Americans went to the École des Beaux Arts and returned as celebrated Paris men who were valued for their skill, their speed, their knowledge, and who mentored a number of other students. In fact, even brought back, in some cases, the atelier system of mentoring within architectural firms in this country. So they did very well. They returned to an America that was having a building boom after the Civil War and after Reconstruction and the periods of the 1870s and 80s when there was a great deal of building. The economy was booming and also failing. There were some crashes. But it was a time of tremendous building, both in the East and in the expanding West. So they were very much in demand when they returned.
Thank you, Roger.
Hmm. Okay. Now let's go to the American story. We will. The next slide shows us what we were just talking about. The first American to attend the École des Beaux-Arts for architecture was Richard Morris Hunt. And he is someone who gave a look to America, perhaps hard to be paralleled. He built the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He was instrumental in many, many homes and public buildings. He was the first to attend. And he was followed after he attended, actually, it was 23 years before the next person attended. H. Richardson, who is not pictured here, but was a major influence, had a short career, built about 100 buildings, and was named a certain style of Beaux-Arts was named for him. He was fond of a Romanesque arched kind of a look. And the H. Richardson buildings, we're going to see some later on or influenced by Richardson. He followed 23 years later. Shortly after that, Charles Fulham McKim of the famous firm McKim, Mead, and White, who were really the most powerful force probably in spreading Beaux-Arts architecture across America. He was followed in 1880 by Jean Mervin Carrère, who was actually French by background, grew up, born in Brazil, grew up in Geneva, attended the Beaux-Arts, as did all these folks, and came back and he formed the firm Carrère and Hastings, and they were known for the New York Public Library and other buildings of note. And then sometime later, John Russell Pope, who gave quite a look to Washington. We see here the Jefferson Memorial. He also did the National Archives and the National Gallery of Art. And as I may have mentioned, in the period of time that architecture was taught at the École des Beaux-Arts for about 120 years, some 500 Americans trained to become architects there. Now we see the proliferation of the Beaux-Arts style through the White City in the next slide. In 1893, Chicago was host to the World Columbian Exhibition, which was a forerunner of the World's Fair. To note, to this point, exhibitions had been held in Europe. This was America's big chance to shine, and Beaux-Arts was put on display in America in something called the White City. Now, it was called that because the buildings in the exhibition were covered with an artificial stone called staff. It's kind of spray painted with a gleaming lead whitewash, and at night, buildings were lit up with a new invention, electrified lighting. Staff was a plaster mixed with cement, glycerin, and dextrin. It was cast in elaborate patterns over hemp fiber, so you got a kind of a flexible building. And this could be attached to building facades. Some criticized the White City, saying it wasn't really a city. They weren't really buildings. They were kind of sheds with these elaborate facades kind of attached to the fronts of them. But the effect of the grandiose White City was profound. It was called an expression of American exceptionalism. Now America had an exposition to rival those held in Europe. The White City also was a cornerstone of the burgeoning City Beautiful movement that swept the nation in the 20th century. And in the time it was open, the exhibition attracted 27 million visitors. It covered 700 acres, and it featured a grand basin with canals, lagoons, court of honor. It was breathtaking. And as I said, 27 million Americans got a good look at a style of architecture which was French in origin, but was coming big time to the United States. There were works by David Burnham, a proponent of the Beaux Arts style, the man who later did the Flatiron Building in Union Station in Washington, D.C., that we saw earlier. Richard M. Hunt designed the Administration Building with 275-foot dome that you see here, said to be higher than the Capitol in Washington. The Agriculture Building and the New York Building by McKim, Mead, and White. Manufacturers and Liberal Arts Building by George B. Post. It was the largest building in the world at that time, covering 30 acres. And finally, the Transportation Building by Louis Sullivan, one of the leading architects of this era in America. Also, it gave rise to a book called, the exhibition did, called The Devil in the White City, which is by Eric Larson, 2003, a kind of historic novel that involved the architect David Burnham, but also a fellow named H. Holmes, who was a con artist and serial killer known as Dr. Torture, the Devil in the White City. Let's look also at how then Beaux-Arts spread throughout America in public monuments. In the next slide, yeah, at this time, America was in the throes of the Gilded Age, so named by Mark Twain in his eponymous novel of 1873 that was co-written with Charles Dudley Warner. Also, the Golden Age, the Gilded Age, if you're following it on PBS, the third season of that begins on Sunday, and it showcases the very era that we're talking about in buildings. In fact, the set for the Fifth Avenue is actually was constructed nearby where I live here on Long Island, and it's really something to to drive by on the road and to look over and see a whole Beaux-Arts stretch in what is otherwise a farm. So watch for that on Sunday. So this time, the Gilded Age was a time of national optimism, westward expansion, and imperialism abroad. There were dazzling fortunes made, largely through cutthroat business practices. And there was a booming economy that alternated with financial crashes and bankruptcies. But it was also a time of massive immigration from Europe, Reconstruction in the South, Jim Crow discrimination, and continual displacement of Native Americans. This period from the end of the Civil War through to the turn of the century, the beginning of the First World War, saw a tremendous changing in the landscape of America, and much of it was Beaux-Arts. It came to represent power, stability, wealth, and conservatism. And that's reflected in these very monuments stand to these days, as we say here, the New York Stock Exchange and nearby the U.S. Customs House, a magnificent building, the Jefferson Memorial, as we saw in Washington, and so many state capitals. Here's the Pennsylvania state capitol in particular, our Supreme Court building in the Grand Central Terminal, and so many of the train stations in America that reflect this Beaux-Arts style. Earlier, we saw a picture of the Metropolitan Museum by Richard M. Hunt, which was built by the city fathers to be a rival to the Louvre, the American Louvre, it was called. It was supposed to be returning to America its due glory, along with the Louvre, the British Museum, and the Uffizi. Next slide, we talk about libraries. Now, libraries are free public institutions, often associated with the rise of the immigrant and the securing and furtherance of democracy through knowledge. We see here some prominent libraries. First of all, the New York Public Library. On the left, both the outside steps and the Astor Hall in the beginning. By the way, the New York Public Library was formed by the coalescence of the Astor Library, let me see if I get this right, the Lenox Library, and the Tilden Foundation. So those who were part of this Gilded Age were very instrumental in the creation of the library, which opened in 1911. In the center, we have the Low Library at Columbia University, also by McKim, Mead, and White, 1895-97, and an example of just a classical structure in line with the idea that these libraries were cathedrals of knowledge, a place where great things happened. And the Boston Public Library by Mead, and White, 1892, very much based on the outside and part of the inside on the Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève by Le Brust that is in Paris just next to the Panthéon. So libraries were very much a part of spreading the Beaux-Arts style. And as I said, this lofty idea that Beaux-Arts was identified with learning and with the elevation of the human spirit through architecture. Now, if we could turn to the Carnegie libraries, these public libraries were part of a building boom in library construction throughout the late 19th century. Much of that boom was due to one person, the philanthropy of Andrew Carnegie, a Scottish-born entrepreneur who built an enormous fortune in trains. And in the end of his life, he dedicated himself to building public libraries around the nation, around Canada, around the UK, and the Western world. From 1883 to 1929, he funded construction of more than 2,500 libraries, about 1,700 of them in the United States, or about half of all the libraries in the country at that time. There were several styles offered, but Beaux-Arts was the common choice, as you see here. These were constructed by the Carnegie Formula. It was a kind of a challenge grant to communities. People had to agree to the terms of Carnegie. It required popular support from the community because it was the community that was going to assemble the library with a kit that was sent by Carnegie, and then they would operate it and pay the staff, and they had to assure that the library would be free to all and that there would be open stacks so that one could circulate among the books. This was an innovation. In part, it was to lower the cost of having staff retrieve books, but also it created a new way of browsing. Now, in terms of building designs, I said that there were a number available. Most were the Beaux-Arts style we see here. The lower center part shows the H.H. Richardson style, or the revival of the Romanesque kind of arches. That's near me in Cold Spring Harbor. And like many of these buildings, it's no longer a library. It's used for DNA research at the Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. But it's a wonderful building. And it shows that if a building has good bones, never tear it down, repurpose it if you can, and use it for something good. Next, we see the explosion of Beaux-Arts in private mansions. If we go to the next slide, please. There was a competitive building frenzy that emerged along Fifth Avenue in the Gilded Age. The game was to out Beaux-Art your neighbor. The Vanderbilt family in particular constructed 5 grandiose homes on or just off of Fifth Avenue, part of more than 20 significant homes built in the 19th and the early 20th century, some of which remain, some do not. It's said that the Vanderbilts alone kept Richard M. Hunt busy as a kind of a personal architect of the family. Some of these were built for, say, Jay Gould, the king of the robber barons. If you're watching the HBO program, the character of George Russell is based on Jay Gould, a man so cutthroat in business he was shunned by society. He built a neo-Gothic mansion on 5th and 67th Street that was just a tad higher than his neighbors. His son tore it down once he died and built a Beaux-Arts mansion that was even larger. That was demolished in 1963, and sadly, it's been replaced by a white brick apartment building. Ugh. So on the left here, we see the private home of Philip Lehman, a banker, his residence on West 54th Street. Architect John Duncan, Beaux-Arts style, rusticated limestone. You see the decorative bowed balustrade and all the other features that are typical of the Beaux-Arts look. Even grander, perhaps, the Henry T. Sloane House by Carrere and Hastings that you see in the center there, done in a late French Renaissance Beaux-Arts style, rusticated limestone, balustrades, elaborate cornices, rounded pediments and ionic columns. That's on East 72nd Street. And down on 36th Street is the J.P. Morgan Home and Library, done in a more quieter Palladian style, very simple on the outside, But if you go there, it's a museum and library today. Check out the library. He saved all the decoration for inside. It's just magnificent and a great experience. So these are three examples of private mansions in Manhattan. And let's go to the next slide where we'll see where the Manhattanites played, the clubmen of the private clubs. Ah, yes. We see four examples, in fact, of clubs for the man about town. It was common for a man of means to belong to private men's clubs. In fact, several. Cornelius Vanderbilt II belonged to 16 clubs. Most grand among them, the University Club by McKim, Mead, and White, up at Fifth Avenue and 45th, and the others down on what's known as Clubhouse Row, 44th Street, just off of Fifth Avenue. The Harvard Club, the Penn Club, the New York Yacht Club that Renee can tell us about because she's been there, and Yale and Princeton clubs. If we go to the next slide, we see that the Beaux-Arts style spread and the opulence of it spread up the Hudson with a series of country homes where conspicuous consumption was the order of the day, both for the old Knickerbockers like the Vanderbilts and the Roosevelts, the old Dutch money, and for the newer money of the Roosevelts and others. We see magnificent mansions. They're all open as museums today and make for a wonderful visit. The ridges above the Hudson just sort of serve as kind of a natural plinth or platform for these structures, which really some of them take your breath away to think that this was for a private family. But the next slide shows that even more grand were the so-called cottages of Newport. This is where conspicuous consumption was expressed to the hilt. This is where the Astor 400, the society class of New York, and some of the Brahmins from Paris came to play during the summer season. We have the Breakers on the left for William K. Vanderbilt, 1892 by Richard Morris Hunt. I'm sorry, 1895 by Richard Morris Hunt, who also designed the Marble House 3 years earlier for Vanderbilt's cousin, William K. Vanderbilt, and his social climbing wife, Alva Smith, who built what she thought was the grandest home in Newport, only to be outdone by her cousin a few doors up the road. The Elms by Edward Julius Berwin, a Philadelphia coal baron, and Rosecliff, the home of Teresa Fair Orlick's, a heiress of a silver mining fortune who built Rosecliff after, as you can see there, the style of the Grand Triennale at Versailles. Not pictured here is a very significant house, Beechwood by by Calvert Vaux, and renovated by Richard Morris Hunt, is the home of the Astors. William Backhouse Astor and Lena Schermerhorn Astor, who was the center of this society. But let's go to the next slide, and I want to emphasize that Beaux-Arts was not just about money. That Beaux-Arts has really affected the landscape of America in common ways. Now, let's take a look here at my hometown of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, as you see on the clock there, and how even a small town, a town of 50,000 people, was affected profoundly by the Beaux-Arts movement. The downtown, I just visited 2 weeks ago to see family and also the Beaux-Arts treasures of Lancaster, how these buildings built in the last 20 years, in the first of the 19th century, the first 20 years of the 20th century came to define what the place looks like today. Watt and Shan department store at the beginning is no longer in existence, but the facade was saved. That's a Marriott peeking out from behind. Hager's department store at the top left. I worked there one Christmas season, men's department. It's a magnificent Beaux-Arts building. Now it's mixed use with apartments upstairs and stores on the ground floor. The courthouse, the magnificent Italianate Central Market there. Just a great place. A working market, open 3 days a week. Fantastic Romanesque architecture in the style of H.H. Richardson. The lower left is the skyscraper from 1925, the Grace Building. And at the lower right is the Municipal Building, originally a post office in a Venetian fantasy kind of style. But at the bottom, I stuck my head into an unbelievable space, the Lancaster Trust Company. You see it as a bank at the turn of the century, and you see it at I'm sorry, 1910 at the center, and you see it on the left as it is today. It was a bank that was designed in this with this soaring barrel ceiling with the coffers just setting everything off in a glittering kind of space. And you can almost hear the hushed tones of somebody depositing a paycheck or taking out a little pin money. And building kind of says, "This is a bank. Your money is safe here." Well, the bank failed in the Depression years, and the building languished for 50 years after that before it was renovated and brought back as what it is today, a performance space. And it's just a magnificent reminder that even in Heartland America, the Beaux-Arts style has a very, very strong imprint on how we live in cities and how we think of our communities. This brings us to our next discussion point, which is the question of what does Beaux-Arts mean for France and America? Did you have a thought on that or a question, Renee? Renee, something
Roger, I'm looking at some of the questions that you and I talked about. I think you've given in this talk, you've really clarified the identity of the Beaux-Arts. But I'm really curious as we come to the end of your conversation is why did France depart from Beaux-Arts before America? And is
oh,
there a
well,
Beaux-Arts revival in America or in France?
yes, that's an interesting question, and I can speculate on that. No, there's not any kind of a revival of any note that I'm aware of in either place so much, but I think Beaux-Arts meant something similar and something a little different to each country. I think in France it was largely an expression of le goût de France, the layers of history of architecture, the styles, the classicism, romanticism, the Rococo, and so forth that were embodied in the decorative nature of Beaux-Arts. I think in the United States it was that, and it was also some identification with European sophistication. That this was a time when the people of money had been to Europe, had taken the Grand Tour, had seen the art of Europe, and very much held it up as an expression of conspicuous consumption, but also of stability and impenetrability when it came to finance and so forth. The Woolworth Building was known as the Cathedral of Commerce. This was a gilded age of wealth and grandiosity. I think that Beaux-Arts ended toward the end of the 19th century in France because other things came along. There was Art Nouveau, which had a tremendous period in France when we think of the decorative work outside of the metro stations and so forth. There's Art Nouveau that swept into La Belle Époque and was very much embraced in France, much more so than Europe. And then came World War I when everything ended, all the building ended, and on the far side of that, France and Europe was ready to embrace modernism, and often in the form of Art Deco, which came after that. So I think that in America, we were still in love with the idea that Beaux-Arts represented some kind of, as I said, grandiosity, the idea that architecture could stand for things, could elevate the human spirit and so forth. We were still full of that, where France perhaps had moved on and was ready for modernism, as was expressed in the Querelle in 1863. By then, there were voices of modernism that felt that form versus function would be the way of the future. And I think France got tired of it. I think that in America, in many ways, maybe we're still in love with that, and we have so many structures that stand out. It's interesting. There was a comment I ran across that said that in France, you could walk down the street and you could see a Beaux-Arts building from the 19th century, and beside it is an older building from the 18th century. You would know that they're from different periods, but they're not really discordant. They're not really out of sync. They kind of go with each other, which um, they have a lot in common, which I think speaks to Labroust's point of view that architecture in France would carry forth its heritage. I think if you did the same in New York and you looked at a modern building beside one from even the 19th century, such as you'd see down in Soho with the cast iron buildings, why they would be as different as night and day. But in France, there's a certain continuity to it. So, do we have a moment left to stump the director here? We have a
We're gonna
little
get everyone
game that
involved
we
in this.
play here. Stump the director. There are a lot of commonalities between Paris and New York in particular, but America. Where are we here? I see Louis Vuitton luggage standing on Fifth Avenue and 57th Street. I see, Beaux Arts theaters in Los Angeles. I see
The
Printemps is
Paris
in New
Theater in
York.
New York.
In New York? Well, why not? So let's take either side. We have two representatives, one of France and the inimicable. Let's go back for a minute. Did we name the person at the bottom there? That is the director. Any thoughts? Jacques Tati and his
Oh,
character,
that is Jacques Tati.
Monsieur Hulot. Okay. And at the right, we have the American, of course, that's Mark Twain. All right. Okay. Two right answers. Let's go to Stump the Director. First slide, please. Where
So of
are we
course, here
here?
we have
Ah,
FIAF, which is now l'Alliance New York, and then our wonderful favorite Fondation Alliance Française in Paris on the Boulevard Raspail.
two right answers. Let's go to the next slide, please. Very good, Renee. You're batting a thousand here. Where are we here? Paris or America? I see a French flag on the left. Where is this?
I think we're in New York, aren't we, at the consulate on Fifth Avenue?
Indeed, we have originally a private building done in the Italian Renaissance style. And at the right, where are we? And we must be in Paris at the, any thoughts?
It's all yours on this one, Roger.
That's the Musée Cernouchi, right at the edge of Parc
Okay.
Monceau. And it's a fantastic building. It's a collection of Asian art. Even if you don't like Asian art, go and see the building. It's just amazing. Next slide, please. Speaking of Paris
So
and New
this
York.
one, this is all you. I looked at this one, and I am not an expert on ceiling. So please
Well,
help us
the
with this
important
one.
thing is with architecture and Beaux-Arts in particular, always look up. On the left, we have the ceiling of the magnificent Musée Jacquemart-André in the 8th arrondissement, Boulevard Haussmann. Henri Parent is the architect. It is the home of Edouard. It was the home of Edouard André and his wife Nelly Jacquemart, serious art collectors, a magnificent particulier who where they have a lot of open evenings and events and stuff. Just a fantastic building with artwork throughout every one of the salons and bedrooms and so forth. Really something to see. And at the right, that's the landing on the third floor of the New York Public Library. Very much inspired by that practice of elaborate paintings and paneling on the ceilings. Next slide, please. We're going to get watery here with two different things. On the left, we have the so-called Wallace fountains. Interesting story with them. Sir Richard Wallace, an Englishman and a philanthropist, decided to provide clean water to Paris in 1871, in part because he wanted to save the Parisians from falling back on drinking wine, something of a teetotaler agenda. So, which one is in Paris? Which one is elsewhere in America? Any thoughts?
I think the
Ah,
left is in Paris and the right's in the States.
I'm afraid we have to.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. On the right is in Paris. That's on the left bank near the Musée des Égouts, the sewer museum. Fantastic. And on the left, believe it or not, that's Los Angeles. That's Westwood Village, Los Angeles, where there is a bank that very much looks French, and in front of it, one of these Wallace fountains, which, by the way, are found all over the world. You see them on Australia and the Far East and such. Now on the right, we have two fountains of similar design. What are we looking at here? Paris or New York?
Up to you, Roger. Let us know so
Okay.
we can discover
Okay,
them
the
both.
fountain on the left is again at the New York Public Library. That's the Archangel Michael and the Devil. The sculptor is Francois Joseph Duret. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong thing. No, the sculptor is Charles Auguste Lebourg. At least he was French, and that is known as. Oh, I'm getting things confused here. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's Truth and Beauty. The sculptor's Fred McMonus. We can edit all this stuff out in the post, right? And on the right is the Archangel Michael and Devil at the Fontaine Saint-Michel. Architect is Gabriel Daviau, and that's in the Quartier Latin. Okay, let's see if we do better on the next. Capitol domes. Any thoughts to France versus or Paris versus America?
Guide us.
Ah, right. On the right is Les Invalides, but a very similar design is the City Hall in San Francisco, designed about 150 years later, but very much resembling the dome, obviously cribbing from the classic in Paris. Next slide, please. We're getting to the end here. We have sculptured doors. On the left or the right, which is Paris? You may have seen it, which is America. Any thoughts? On the
You're
left.
on.
Okay, music, poetry, knowledge, wisdom, truth, romance. Those are the themes of the doors of the Boston Public Library, the vestibule. Sculptor Daniel Chester French, at least he has a French name. He studied at MIT in Florence. This is a bronze relief doorway, very similar to one that you may have seen in the Musée Carnavalet. That's woman presenting necklaces. This is in a jewelry shop. The whole shop is recreated in the Musée Carnavalet. It's really of an Art Nouveau kind of style. So
Mhm.
that's in Paris. And then I think finally we have the Passage Couvert. Where are we here? Renee, you already
Well, isn't
established
one of
it.
them Les Halles?
No, no, they're not. I think we were closer on the right when we talked earlier. That is the Passage du Grand Cerf. And if you see the entrance of it, it has a buck, a deer on the entrance of it. And that's 1825, Passage du Grand Cerf. And on the left is in Los Angeles again, which has a fantastic art Beaux Arts downtown area. That is the Broadway Arcade building in Los Angeles. And in fact, it has a bistro there on the left side serving French food. And you would think, just for a moment, that aside from the size of it, that you're really in one of the Passage Couffert of Paris. Just a fantastic experience in downtown Los Angeles. Oh, so this sadly brings us to the end. If we may see the last slide, I wanted to say merci and thank you for letting me be part of your day today. And thank you and merci de l'Alliance Française. This is a picture, once again, of the Low Library at Columbia University. And these are the flags of all the students who were part of the graduation ceremony, all the countries represented. And may Beaux-Arts architecture and may our wonderful institutions of higher learning remain beacons of education and enlightenment to the rest of the world. I thank you, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Roger, so much. There are a couple of questions in the chat, but I don't think we have any more time. I think if people can direct the questions directly to you by email, it could be great.
Okay.
So we could, what's your email? I'm going to put it, is that okay with you?
Oh, that'd be fine. It's
Okay, so
Roger
Roger,
Mum.
what's your email? I'm typing it in the chat.
Yeah, it's Roger Mum, ROGERMUM at AOL.com. And it is, yeah, I'm about to put out another newsletter, and I'd be happy to put some answers in the newsletter. We get some great questions, and they often show me things that I have not covered, and I'm happy to address them. And by the way, I think you mentioned this will be on YouTube. It'll be posted on YouTube along with the other programs. And please visit my site, which is theparisproject.net, and sign up for the free newsletter, the city, Paris, a City of Ideas. So I thank you again.
Thank you again, Roger.
My
Bye-bye.
pleasure.